Live from the bunker will not be seen this week so that we may bring you the following special program.
In place of a Dark Lord, you would have a queen! Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn! Treacherous as the sea! Stronger than the foundations of the earth! All shall love me understand!
Hello, everyone. This is Science Fiction Snob coming at you from the Great White North. And the Great White North is all of a sudden much whiter today, as we had a drop of about 2 to 3 inches of snow. So thank you, Al Gore, and your global warning for that.
Happy spring.
Happy spring. Yeah, so, and with me today, of course, as always, is my co-host, Cam.
Hello, everyone.
What about you, Cam? You guys get any snow where you guys were?
No snow. We had some rain.
Yeah, it was nice. I was looking forward to spring. You know, good thing I didn't put out the lawn furniture or anything yet. Hey, we got to lock everything up around here. And all of a sudden, boom, last night, 2 to 3 inches of snow. It was kind of it was like winter had returned, but I can't complain too much. The sun has just come out and it's starting to melt stuff, but this is probably the last of it. But we'll see. Curse you, Al Gore. Oh, thanks a lot, the Americans, for giving us that guy. Yeah. All right. Anyway, enough complaining about that.
Well, different kind of ecology to talk about today, though, right?
We do. Different type of ecology and philosophy and all kinds of stuff. Environmentalism, because today we're talking about Dune. We're going to talk about overall in general about the various aspects of Dune. We're going to try to look at the we only have an hour, so it's it'll be a bit packed, but we're going to try to talk about the movies, a little bit about the both the Frank Herbert books, and a little bit about his son Brian Herbert and the Kevin J. Anderson books. We'll talk a little bit about them. And if we have time at the end, I do want to go over real quick. I want to go over the various, there's been since the Dune movies have come out, when they first announced the Dune movies, this Dune Part 1, the Villeneuve Dune, it was kind of like a renaissance in the Dune universe. They started working on a bunch of board games and video games to come out to feed off of the Dune movie and try to use it to, sell more stuff, I guess, right? Marvel, sure. If only Marvel Comics had done the same thing with all the Marvel movies. So they were pretty smart with that. So I'm going to go over, just quickly go over those if anyone's interested. Maybe you'll see something that you like or that you're interested in. Yeah, so why don't we go right into it? I think we should go, we're going to go into the new Dune movies right off the bat, since that's kind of what everybody knows about. So let's talk about that. So, Cam, you recently saw Dune Part 2. What about your quick thoughts about overall about Dune Part 1 and 2?
I just saw Part 2 over the weekend, and I like the first part better than the second part. I left the second one left me a little cold. I didn't hate it, and I didn't think it was completely out of line, but again, they took some license with the actual story that I don't think they need to. And we could probably talk about some of that, but just generally, it was a little off, and honestly, I thought it was a little boring.
Really?
Yeah. And
okay, so we talked about this, so I think you know what I'm going to say about it. Mm-hmm. I've got some concerns about Dune Part 3, but I'm gonna sort of tie it in all together. My opinion, I actually enjoyed both movies. They're both good. They're both fairly close to the original. It's just a solid movie. I mean, well written. I mean, they're following the book. The books are good, but well acted. Good scenes, good special effects mixed with regular effects. I don't have any real complaints with any of them. Now, I do have a few small nitpicks, and I'm going to go with. Well, some of them are not so small. So the first one I'm going to talk about was from the part 1, which is the whole sex change for Liet Kynes. Now, I mean, it's not a big deal. It doesn't really affect the story too much. And I understand why he's like, okay, well, we want to put some more women in there. But, in my view, part of the strength of the Dune universe is that it is the Landsraad, and the universe is such a patriarchy. And the stronger, if you dilute the patriarchy-ness of it, well, when women do things in that, it's less of a impact. So, for example, it's just like your heroes and your villains in any story. The more powerful you make your villain, the more scary, the more competent your villain is, then the more of a triumph it is when the hero defeats the villain. If you've got a weak villain and you make him a joke, and you make him the joke of everything, well, when the hero defeats him, the audience is like, yeah, whatever, who cares? The guy's lame. What do you have any comments about that?
Well, so you're saying that in regards to reducing the appearance of patriarchy? Well, I agree with what you said about the villain. I'm saying, are you bringing making that analogous to the fact that there isn't a patriarchy in the film version?
Well, I mean, there is a patriarchy. I mean, well, I guess it's not pushed, but those of us who read the book know that the Dune universe is an extreme. It's basically a feudal society, right? So the whole empire is a feudal society. Men run everything. You never hear about you don't hear about any the women are all wives to the various dukes and counts and whoever, but you never hear about a woman being like a head of a house. It's always a male. Now, and that's contrasted with the Bene Gesserit, who are they're women, but they're manipulating things around but they also are very powerful. They don't have direct power, but they have manipulative power. So my point being is that if you go, okay, well, there's too many, this is too much of a patriarchy, let's throw some women in there as for whatever reason to try to minimize that so modern audiences won't get angry. Well, then you take away from the Bene Gesserit and how powerful they eventually are seen to become, because they're one of the few groups that survive all the way through all the books, right?
Yeah.
The Landsraad doesn't survive. The Landsraad is barely going to survive, book 1. But, by the time we got Emperor, the Landsraad is going to cease to exist, and these houses run by all these men are going to cease to exist, really. So that's my kind of thought about it. So that's why I was kind of against the whole making Liet Kynes a woman, because it kind of takes away from that whole idea. But it wasn't a big deal to me.
I think that like you said, if you take all of Frank Herbert's 6 books as a whole, it will do that to some degree. There are these divisions between the sexes, and but within the movie itself, it, like you said, it probably, you wouldn't notice it if all you did was watch these movies. You wouldn't be like, hey, that really throws something off. So within itself, it's okay. Again, relatively minor character when it comes down to it. So it wasn't a big problem, but again, let me tangent off for 1 second. I don't have a problem with race swaps, gender swaps, blah, 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 blah. It's when it's so blatantly done because there's someone that says, we just have to do this. There's no natural reason for it. No, not even just a diversity reason. It's all just fakery. So I'm not for that for those reasons.
Yeah. And I'm not, I agree with that. And also I don't, I'm kind of two parts of the, for the Fremen, for example. So they're kind of, they are, the whole, Herbert took, the Landsrat is kind of, I'm not going to say they're not white, but they're medieval, right? So they have a sort of a European medieval background, while the Fremen have a very much of an Arab, Muslim Islamic background. So, people talk about, I would assume then that in the case, living in a desert, the people, well, you could take it a couple of ways. Either the Fremen are, completely white, like a fish who lives at the bottom of the sea because they get no sun at all. Or you would assume that they would sort of have a more of a, a background similar to what you would get on, here on Earth with people who lived in a desert setting. So, so that's, I don't really care though either way.
Sure.
But I think that, Herbert writing in 65, he pretty much said, okay, yeah, the Landsrat's going to be this European feudal, and I'm going to contrast this with, the Fremen, who are going to be Arab / Islamic. That's where their background comes from. So.
Right. And so just backing up again, generally, I said I kind of didn't love the second part, but overall, by today's standards, I think that the Dune parts 1 and 2, taken together, is a pretty good adaptation in general. It doesn't have a lot of the big flaws that many other things in entertainment do. It gets the point across pretty well. It's quality made, craft wise. So I don't want to say it's bad or put people off it. It just didn't thrill me, at a high level.
Yeah, and I would agree with that comment about the it being better than most of the stuff that's out there, and I would completely agree with that. So it is much better there, much better than what you normally see out there. Now, my understanding is there was a bunch of scenes that were filmed that are good and that add to the movie, but I'd love to see a sort of a director's cut or all the cut scenes. Apparently Villeneuve has said he's if I cut this out of the movie, then it's never going to be in there, and we're never going to see these uncut scenes, which is a shame, because there's a lot of there's a couple of bunch of scenes from the book that are quite good scenes that have supposedly been cut, that he filmed, that he cut out of the movie.
Yeah, see, I don't like that. I understand if you don't want to do a director's cut or some alternate cut of it, but I see no reason to not show those things as extras on DVDs and such. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's your choice, and you said you didn't want it in there, that's fine. So the movie stands as its own, but just as an extra point of interest for fans, why wouldn't you show it?
Yeah, well, he's not going to release them. He says, if I cut it, I don't want people to see it because it's not worth putting in. But we'll see. Maybe they'll change their mind. Maybe, I was kind of one of my favorite characters in Dune is Count Fenring, and we see Lady Fenring in there in part 2. But there's sort of this. We don't actually know if they filmed scenes with Count Fenring or not. But supposedly this one guy who was there was supposed to play him, but supposedly some scenes were shot, but no one really knows for sure. I'd love to see those scenes and some other various scenes, but
yeah. See, I think I think that's the scenes with her were kind of confusing. I was watching it with 2 people that hadn't read the books, and and they both liked it more than I did. But I was watching. I'm like, man, how is anybody going to understand what's going on with some of this stuff if they hadn't read the books? And maybe they just kind of took it at face value and were like, fine, but to me, it was, her scenes. I'm like, what, they were confusing in my opinion.
Yeah. So, I'm going to go on to my big concern about the Dune franchise and Dune 3 is what they've been doing with, Chiani and the character. And I'm not sure quite why they've done it. It seems to be this sort of, I don't know if it's this woke stuff. We need more women in the film, or they need to take a bigger part. But if you will notice, there was a couple of hints at it. So, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen the movie. At the end of the movie, it ends similar to the other Dune movie, and the book, where Paul takes, there's a confrontation between Paul and the Emperor. He kills Fade Rathula, and he says, I'm going to marry the princess, the Emperor's daughter, and I will become the Emperor. Right. So they ended very similar to the 1984 movie and the book, same thing. So, however, one of the key things that are taken out of there is that in Dune Part 2, he says that, and Chiani, gets this dirty look on her face and gets all angry, and she leaves the room and gets on a worm and rides away. So it's
Yeah.
that's a great comment. Actually, so it seems to me like they want her to do more. Now, this is nothing to do with the book at all. And you notice that I saw this back at sort of the end of part 1. So in part 1 and in the Dune universe, when Paul kills Jamis, he takes over. Jamis's wife becomes his wife. So I don't think there's anything sexual in it, but the idea is that, you have to look after this man's family if you kill him, right? You've killed one of our, people. Now you got to look after his family. So so this whole sort of, having multiple wives is not a big deal in Fremen culture because, and Chiani wouldn't be upset with that because she knows that this is part of her culture. And Paul is already sort of technically, married to Jamis's wife, or at least taking care of her. And it's implied from my reading of the book is that, he took her as a wife. But, then she, so in the book, there's about a, 3+ year period between, before the end, before he confronts the Emperor. Right. In the story, in the movie, it's not even 9 months because his mother is pregnant with Alia, but Alia isn't even born yet.
Right.
So it's less than 9 months, but yet in the, as I said in the book, Alia's already born. She's a couple years old, 2, 3, something like that. And, going around causing problems. So it's, 3 to 5 years between sort of the part 1 and the part 2. But in the movie, it's only, like I said, only a couple months less than 9. So, in the book, there's no reason for Chani to be upset. First of all, she knows that this is her culture and that Paul has already taken care of this woman and his family. She's had time with him. They've been together for 3+ years. She's already, in the book, she already gets pregnant and they have a baby. And, that first baby is killed in a raid that the Harkonnens do on Fremen Siege, and her, their son is killed. So she's very confident in her relationship with Paul. There was no way at the end of the book she would run away like that. Plus, Paul says at the end of the book, he says, I will take, the princess as a wife, but I will never, I will never lie with her. She will never get anything from me other than, I'm her husband. That's it. Right. He says that right off the bat, which of course pisses the Emperor off. Right.
Right.
But you noticed in the movie, he doesn't say that, right? He goes, I'll take her as a wife. And he just sort of stares around. And then Chani stares at him and she looks angry. And he stares at her with this kind of blank look on his face. And then she takes off and rides away on a worm. So Fremen women support their men. That's what they do. He is, the emperor of the known universe now. He is the most powerful, you couldn't pick a better husband. He's the most powerful person in the entire universe. Why would she take off on him? But they've set it up and purposely taken things, out of part 1 and part 2 that are big. So Villeneuve has done that, in my view, to in order that he can have some sort of story focused on Chani in part 3. I think that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, and this gets back to your point before about what they're doing with women in it and how it undercuts things, and I think this undercuts the final line of the book, the actual Dune, the first novel, badly because, well, I guess we can go into it. It's it basically quickly. It's Jessica talking to Chani about how she's kind of comforting her a little bit because obviously there it's not like Chani has no reaction to Paul getting married, but you know, Jessica is reinforcing that her loyalty to Paul is a good thing, and she says, uh, while we Chani, we who carry the name concubine, history call us wives. So it's really talking about the triumph of women like them in
Yes.
history, and Villeneuve just completely throws it out the window. It's Chani in the movie can be like, oh, I'm a tough independent woman or something. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, even had her like, in the book, I don't remember her fighting, like in the movie, she runs one of the, oh, we're gonna attack the Emperor. Johnny, you take the left wing, you take the right, somebody going, this kind of stuff. I don't remember her have anything to do with that in the book. And I don't think Paul would, oh, here's the mother of my children. She's already had one kid by me. I mean, the last thing you do is sort of, yeah, send my wife off to fight in the war. I mean, that's what I would never do that.
Yeah,
Um,
and
so it seems like he's sort of he's getting far, like I said, changing late kinds from male to female, not a minor change, not a big deal. But now this seems to me like a big, big change, and he's going to take the story in another direction. And I have a lot of respect for, if anybody knows Quinn's ideas. I have a lot of respect for him and his, like, he's got a ton of stuff on Dune. If you want to get into deep dive about the Dune, he's the guy you go to. And he's been saying, hey, I can't wait for Dune 3. I am very cautious about Dune Part 3 because of this. It seems like he's going to tell a completely different story. And, there's a discussion about the kind of the stories between Dune Messiah and stuff like, people have said, okay, well, Frank Herbert wrote this as a cautionary tale, but yet people were too, we like Paul and stuff. And he's like, and Herbert's trying to say, no, you shouldn't like him. I mean, that's what's going to happen in Dune Messiah in the next book. It's much more a cautionary tale about, following a religious leader and religious fanaticism because of all the 90 billion or so people who are going to be killed in the war, and Paul not being able to face that, and going out into the desert and all this stuff. So and the whole the jihad being run by Alia afterwards, and how things can kind of get out of control with these religious people, no matter how no matter what the leaders' ideas were. It can get out of control when people come in and take stuff over. So I'm a little bit concerned about the next volume. If it's going to be, Paul has to chase down Gianni, and there's a couple of there's just a couple of things. I'm going to go back a little bit too. I mean, the fact when I think it's part 2 when they say. I don't know. I can't remember if it's part 1 or part 2, but Stilgar is outside, and they're talking about Paul and or maybe it was Jessica, but he's praying, hoping that something goes right, and Gianni is sitting with the young kids, and they're going, oh yeah, Stilgar is one of them crazy Southern Fremen, where
yeah,
they're all the religious
I did not like
garbage.
I did not like that at all, and
Yeah,
and it, to a larger point, Chani just annoyed the living hell out of me. It's I don't have anything against the actress per se, but I did not like her in this role at all. It's like every time she talked, there's something about her voice that just was grating to me in this role, and I didn't like her at all. Even though it's like, oh, okay, she's going to be a fighter, or whatever. That didn't really bother me too much, but I don't know. And the whole thing with her and her friends, like, it's like, oh, look, we're stupid teenagers. It's like, no, that's not how the Fremen children are. Or,
yeah,
young people, certainly not at their age.
yeah,
A
yeah,
part that's not in here is the Fremen children, like Alia's age. In combat, they would go and like finish off the wounded, the enemy
yeah.
wounded and stuff. I mean, at 2-3 years old.
Yeah,
So
they would be taking their water and stuff, and
right, and so I didn't like they were trying to create this contrast, where it's like, oh, we're like hip and young and we're too cool for religion. It's like, no, the Fremen were like conditioned into this by the Bene Gesserit. I mean, that was kind of the whole point. And I, I'm not saying they're all uniform, but I didn't like that they made it so stark like that.
Yeah, and the this whole like the Fremen society is very much tribal, right? So their tribes are going to be very, very close knit. So there's no way that Stilgar would come from, you know, another tribe half a world away from the south and
Right.
take over as leader of this other tribe, unless if he killed the former leader or something like that. But generally speaking, you know, all the Fremen tribes, I mean, they get together and each, you know, Siege leader is a guy unto himself, and they would get together and talk. You know, they would talk about stuff and plan things together for sure. But each tribe would be, you know, an entity in unto itself and almost completely, you know, sovereign into itself, right? And
Mhm.
the other tribes would, okay, well, I don't agree with you, but I'm going to respect your thing, and we're going to do our thing. You don't want to help us, fine, off you go. Yeah, it's just this whole division between the you know, between the old people and the young people. Well, there's going to be some of that, but it's going to be tribes mainly, and tribes are going to disagree with other tribes. That's how I would see this as going, not you know, old Southern weird religious types versus us progressive Fremen. I mean, of course, there is a difference between the city Fremen versus the siege Fremen, of course, but
Right.
yeah,
And
not like this.
Green Girl in the chat here brings up, she says, I wanted to add there was far too much crying, sweating, and whatnot for people who don't waste water. And that was a good point. Paul, I think they did have this in it where, after he killed Jameis, he did shed a tear. And that was like, it really took them all aback. And they were like, oh, he's crying, he's weeping for the dead, which is, uh,
Yeah,
I think they took it as like an honor. And so to have other people doing that commonly just undercuts that. Um,
yeah,
so there's just a lot of little things that rub me the wrong way with this. And one of the other things is the Sardaukar, they make the point that okay, they're these really tough fighters and everything, and the fact that any of them were taken down by the Fremen is I mean, they did kind of mention it, but it's like, holy crap, what does this mean? And I don't think it was portrayed well on screen though. Is that the fights with the Fremen and such were, it was just like, it's just some kind of guys kind of doing some kicks and stabbing some people. It did not bring across that they're almost supernatural abilities. Uh,
yeah.
I thought that was poorly portrayed.
So I kind of disagree with that. I in part two, I like the movie. I like that scene where they're flying up to the top of the hill there, and I guess I think it's the Harkonnen are taken out, not the Sardaukar. I can't remember offhand, but yeah, generally speaking, like the way that the ranking of military is that the Harkonnens are pretty good, but they're very cruel. The Atreides soldiers are generally above them. They're a little better skilled, and they're more honorable. They're not cruel. And then the Sardaukar are, the Emperor's fist, so to speak, and they're the Sardaukar are a little bit should be a little bit concerned about the Atreides. Hey, these guys are pretty tough, and they've been getting better, but we're still going to take them out. But the Fremen are still supposed to be better than the Sardaukar. Now, I mean, I might agree with you that they weren't put, it wasn't portrayed very well in the movie, showing that the Fremen are better than the Sardaukar, but they are supposed to be better, right? The whole idea of the Fremen is that I think there's one battle in Dune where they, 10 Fremen take on 10 Harkonnens, and one Fremen is killed, 2 are injured, and all 10 Harkonnens are dead.
Yeah, well, there's another good example too. Is at the end. Again, this is for the novel, so decades to spoil it. But when they capture Alia, it's that they come back and they report to the Emperor, and when he's talking to the Baron and all this, and he's like, 2 squads or whatever of my Sardaukar were killed. Like 3 of them got away with the hostage, and it was old men and women and children that beat
Yeah.
them. It's like so. That was a whole shock that again didn't come across in the movie,
Not as well. Yeah.
and why, it's, well, I don't know what we're going to see in the third movie, but as you see in Dune Messiah, the Fremen get unleashed on the
The
universe,
universe.
and they just
They mop them up.
obliterate. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean it's overwhelming.
Yeah. It's kind of. I'm going to go back to. I mean, I remember prior to the movie, even the first part coming out. I going back to the Dune '84 movie. I was kind of. It's really weird where they have the the weirding way is this sonic thing, right?
right.
Like, I mean, what the hell is that? Where did that come from? But they talked about prior to Dune Part One coming out, they talked about the weirding way, and they're showing, they would show promo stuff about um, what's his name, going with Chalamet, going, taking some sort of weird martial art with some martial arts guy, and they're sort of promoting that. Oh, here we're doing the weirding way, but in the movie you don't really see any of that. And
Right.
the whole, that's part of the reason why the Fremen are supposed to be better fighters. They're better pound for pound anyway, because they've lived in this, horrible, in this desert for thousands of years. They've been toughened up, and they've been, selected. Anyone who is weak has died out. But part of it is also Paul is supposed to teach them this weirding way, but we don't see any sort of fighting style by the Fremen that gets us to this weirding way. It's like Villeneuve got in there and he said, I'm going to spend all this time working on this weirding way stuff, and then we don't get to see it in the movie. We don't see anything. Like, we don't see them fighting in some sort of unusual martial arts style that would defeat the Sardaukar and everything like that. So
Right.
I kind of a little bit disappointed about that aspect of it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great.
And
Great.
the well, I have a lot of nitpicks, but again, it wasn't bad, but it just the same thing with Lord of the Rings, other these epic, stories that have so many years behind them and are considered these great works. It's just a very big challenge to adapt them at all. So I should be grateful that this was a pretty good adaptation.
Yeah, and that's kind of my thought too. It's pretty good. I am a little concerned about where it's going and what Villeneuve is trying to do, and I think he's trying to make it more, I don't know, woman friendly. But look, these books are great, and this is what I would say to anybody who adapts a book. These books are great because of the way that they're written. Trying to make it more, quote, modern audience or anything, don't do that. Just stick in general to what is being done, because that there's a reason for these things are doing. They're doing these sort of things. All right. Do you want to talk a little bit about? Do we want to talk about? We're already half an hour in. Do you want to talk about Dune 1984?
Sure.
Oh, hey. Well, actually, before we go to that, we're gonna discuss this question here. Are you disappointed the Spacing Guild was left out of the recent films? Me personally, yeah, I wish it. Dune, going to Dune 1984. There was, right at the beginning, there's the Spacing Guild and talk of them, and they're sort of behind the conspiracy, and they're telling the Emperor what to do, which is, I think that's a little off, but yeah, it was left out of the. I am a little disappointed. I think that the thought amongst the Dune community, I guess, is that we're going to see a lot more of that in Part 3. We're going to see the Spacing Guild. We're going to see more of the Bene Gesserit. We're going to see the Talaxu. Maybe we'll get something about Ix, but that's a good point. I would like to see some of that. And where's the comment? Someone made a comment earlier that was where is it? I'm trying to look. I can't remember. Oh, here it is. Here. Okay. Yeah, Lord Crunk. No one spoke Piter's name in Part 1. No one spoke Aurelia name in Part. I always pronounce her name wrong. In Part 2, yeah, and I didn't get Count a little bit of Count Fenring. I would have liked to see a little piece of him. But yeah,
for
that's
those
a
who
good point.
For those who don't know, Count Fenring has this weird vocal tones that it's actually some kind of coding thing, I think, right? It's some messaging thing he does, but he has this weird way he speaks. That's why he was, all that. Anyway, so yeah, so
you ruin the joke if you have to explain it.
Well,
I tell that to Jason too. Yeah, it's Count Fenring is a failed Kwisatz Haderach, it's mentioned in the books, but yeah, he's basically Paul's predecessor that has failed. One generation, he's like, okay, maybe this guy is it. No, he's not. He's not. He fails. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was kind of disappointed but it's kind of like Justice League for DC, the movie. I mean, do you really want to squish everything in there? Maybe give it a chance to breathe and let it come in. I mean, I am looking forward to seeing more of the Empire, the Imperium, the universe, the Spacing Guild, and the Talaxu especially. But
well, for as a preview for people, if they follow the book, Dune Messiah is basically a lot of it is having to do with a conspiracy that involves a lot of these different entities. So you do get to learn a little bit about them and their motivations and the kind of the aftermath of the first book and how they're trying to deal with it in this middle zone, I guess I'd call it.
Because they're opposing the Paul's jihad.
Right. Well, they unsuccessfully opposed it, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, they're trying to.
They're opposing it. They're trying to, right, and even into Children of Dune, right? That's why his kids are there. It's an attempted assassination on them, that kind of thing, right?
Yep.
So, yeah. So go ahead.
I was going to say, so the 1984 movie has been panned by people since it came out because it is so the book was so dense, and they tried to. The legend goes, this was a little before my time in there, but that they put out in the theaters, they had like a guidebook to like prime you on what you were going to see
really
in the movie.
That's not good.
Yeah, and I mean they added all this exposition and such in the actual movie to try and get you where you needed to be. So I think the movie was at the time largely seen as a failure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I keep track of famous science fiction movies, and Dune and Battlefield Earth are generally seen as like the worst released science fiction movies, getting like 0 to like half a star when released. Now, I think we come to appreciate Dune, the 1984 Dune version, a little bit more, and there were some things that were done well. Like I think some of the costuming was done fairly well. Like I like the Atreides uniforms, but then you see the guild and the spacing, the spaceships going through, and the guild navigator coming out, and he's all glowing and he's like puking out this beam and he's attaching. You're like, what the hell, What are you doing? And it just looks very cheesy, and I'm just like, look, you want to do the guild, just have a picture of a planet and then pop, a ship, the guild ship appears. Just do that. You don't need to do anything else. You don't need to do all this. So there are some cheesy things about it. One thing,
Dave D Pensac in the chat mentions that it was a list of names that they put out as kind of a pamphlet for the movie.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. So I think that, and Dune 1984 tried to do this. They had some big vistas, but even like you look at the beginning of the film with the Emperor's, golden throne room, the gold is nice, but it's still kind of small. This version of Dune, Villeneuve's version of Dune, did very well with the size and scope of Dune. You get these wide shots, you got these huge ships, tiny little figures. You kind of get the grand scale, and I see that Dune 1984 tried to do that, but they just weren't as successful. They didn't have the budget. I didn't think they could do it. Yeah. So that's what I have kind of a love-hate with 94 film. Some things I like. I like. I mean, the Sidecar, and why are the Sidecar in these nuclear protection things, right? They're supposedly from a planet that's been irradiated. So they wear with these rubberized suits all the time, but why? They're not on that planet anymore. Are they themselves nuclear, radioactive, and they're trying to protect their enemies they're fighting from getting radiation? Like, what the hell is up with that? Like, it doesn't make sense. It's kind of lame. But anyway,
One note I'd like to make, and we preview tomorrow. We might be talking about some other sci-fi books and such. But Dune, we were talking about how dense it is and how there's all this material and everything. But the actual the story in the paperback version here is just under 500 pages, which sounds like a lot, but by today's standards, where people put out 1,000-page books and apparently they get paid by the letter and such. In the past, they did a lot more with a relatively small amount of text. So just an observation about that.
Yeah. Is there any? I don't want to. We don't have a huge amount of time. I don't want to. Talk about that movie too much. I mean, you could do a whole show just on comparing the two movies. Let's move. Let's move on to the Brian Herbert books. I'm not sure what we want to talk about them. We just want to contrast the Frank Herbert books with the Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson novels. Is there something you want to say about Herbert's novels?
Well, if just very quickly, so Frank Herbert wrote 6 novels. You have Dune,
Yes.
Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, and those are in relatively close time frame to each other. And then God Emperor, it's like 12 years between the first and second book.
Go ahead. Yeah, you're right.
And then Children of Dune kind of sets up where they go from there. And then between Children of Dune and God Emperor of Dune, there's a very long period of time, a couple thousand years.
Yeah, about 4,500 years is has passed until when God Emperor focuses on the last part, the final of the worms thing, and it's about 4,500 years.
Right. And then the 5th and 6th books are even farther in the future from that. The 5th and 6th are very close to each other again, but there is a gap between the 4th and 5th as well.
Yeah, so it's 1,500 years between God Emperor and Heretics and Chapter House are basically one novel split in 2.
Right.
There's no real time difference in them. It's just like sort of one big novel that's been cut up.
Right. So and I'm just talking about this so when we talk about the other ones, you'll know. So Herbert kind of goes off in some even more philosophical directions with this, and it focuses very largely on the Bene Gesserit by the end.
Yes.
Which is good. I recommend people read all 6 of those. But then the Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson books are, well, the first ones are prequels, I guess. They did quite a few of them, but they did, I think it was 3 prequels for House Atreides, House Harkonnen, and House Carino.
Yes, so those are the House novels. They're prequels. They talk about Duke Paulus is in the House Atreides one, and I think he actually dies in that one. Like, it shows his death, how he dies fighting a bull and all that stuff. It was a conspiracy, by the way. He was poisoned.
Yeah, and it's like
go ahead.
Leto as a young man, like
yes.
Paul's age kind of thing.
Yeah. So nobody writes like, I'll say a couple things. Nobody writes like Frank Herbert. Nobody writes this big philosophical manifestos and all that stuff. Like, you can't write like him. So I respect, first of all, I'll say, I don't know how much of Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, how much percentage of them is each in those novels. Sometimes they write novels where some guy write the first half and some guy writes the second half, and you go, okay, I'm going to write the first half and it's going to come to here. I've read that, and you can kind of sometimes very often see a split, and you're like, oh, that's weird. Like, it kind of just sort of, the whole thing kind of changes. So I'm not sure how they divided up the way it's written. But if you read any other of Kevin J. Anderson's stuff, and I like him as a writer, but he writes, in a more modern version where, you can sort of see the novel come out as a movie, right? Like, it's got, moves from action sequence to action sequence, or some sort of sequence to it, like a movie, not with, pages and pages of philosophy, which, Frank Herbert kind of writes like that. Right.
Yeah.
And, not to criticize Anderson, because, like I said, nobody writes like Frank Herbert. Like, you You can't do it. You can't fake his stuff. You can't copy it. But
Yeah.
it's more like a standard, science fiction, novel that you might read. You might read, the extended universe of Star Wars or Star Trek or any of those. Right? It's much more like a very easily digestible science fiction novel that you'd expect from
100%
any
correct.
mainstream.
So there's a culture shock between the two. If you're like really into Frank Herbert's work and then you go back to the other ones, they are very, very different in style.
Yeah, and you can't like my off a little tangent. My daughter read the Douglas Adams books, right? Hitchhiker's Guide and all that, and she said, "Oh, this is great. I want to read." He's dead. There are no more novels that he can't read anymore. She's like, "Oh, okay. Well, who could where could I? Who writes like this that I could get something similar?" I'm like, "Well, Douglas Adams. No one really. I don't know of anybody. Maybe there are people who write like him, but I can't really recommend another writer who writes like him because he's so unique." And that's the same with sort of Frank Herbert. You can't really, So there's a kind of a, being a snob, I'm supposed to be, everything that Frank didn't write is shit. But I want to try to be a little more honest about it. My understanding, and I don't know if this is how true this is. This could be PR that Brian Herbert put out in order to sell more books. But supposedly, when Frank Herbert died, he had tons and tons of notes about where he expected the universe to go and the backstory of it. He's understood to have written, tons and tons of backstory to all these characters that you never see and hear about, right? He's got these, he was very prolific and much more prolific than the books indicate. So, based on that, the suggestion is that, I would kind of say, okay, in the house novels, you're getting the background of Dune. So that's probably a lot of his thoughts about it. They're not making up their own stuff for that kind of thing. That's a lot of Frank Herbert's thoughts on how these things go. And I can see, if you would assume that it's correct that Frank Herbert, spent a lot of time writing the backstory of everybody, you can see how they said, "Oh, look, here's my father's stuff about the backstory. Let's just put it in a novel. Away we go."
Yeah.
The same with the Butlerian jihad stories. Like you can see that he would go, "Okay, well, the jihad is big in this universe. Let me outline how the jihad sort of generally works." But I am less keen about those novels because they seem to kind of go a little bit meander. They don't seem to be very, focused. They kind of go, "Okay, we got 3 novels. We got to get from here to here. Let's just, go a little bit over here and a little bit over here." So I'm less, feel less strongly about those ones, him having a great involvement in those. Maybe not at all.
Well,
Go ahead. I cut you off.
Here's my take on it is that it kind of based on what you were saying about Kevin J. Anderson's writing and things, I don't doubt that there was a lot of material that Herbert left behind, just the same way Tolkien did, and that it did touch on these things. But what it strikes me as is that they had this material and this framework, which probably is reflected. I read the first 2 trilogies, which is, like I said, the Butlerian Jihad one, and then the house ones, and it seems to me as if it was, they took this framework and then they brought in Kevin J. Anderson and said, "Hey, put a plot on this," and the plots are, like you said, very modern, standard kind of fare, and it brings in these other elements and it's set in the universe and everything, but it feels almost detached to me. And while I enjoyed those books, both trilogies, I don't know how to say this without sounding insulting, but they seem, it's like pretty pedantic, it's it's very standard kind of stuff that's almost, I mean, it's not befitting the legend of Frank Herbert. It's and again, who can, like you said, who can do it, right?
Yeah.
But it just doesn't quite make it,
Yeah. So I think I've been thinking about this for a long time, trying to figure, what the difference is. And I kind of think that, what you just said there makes me think it's kind of like I said, I don't have trouble with the house novels because I think they kind of fit in that mold. But you notice that for all the stuff written by Brian and Kevin, it's kind of very linear, right?
Yes.
And if you read Dune again, it's not linear at all. Like they go from point A to point B, but Herbert will be like, oh, and then a couple years pass, and I'm going to talk about this, and here's a bunch of philosophy in there, and it's just on these sort of tangents and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
that's a good way of putting it. They're very connected dots, on
yes,
the other ones.
linear. I think that's the word I'm going to use from now
Yeah.
on. Fighting to try to describe this to people, but yeah, they're very linear. And so my thinking is that he might have outlined what the jihad, a little like key points in it, that there'd be this character, and the guy who his name escapes me, and I'm reading it again right now, but the guy who invented shields, and who invents
Holtzman.
Holtzman, yeah. So he's like, okay, he probably outlined those characters and sort of the general overview, but again, the jihad books are very linear. The house books are the same. I don't fault them for that, but I kind of think,
I think that the criticism I have of it, the Butler and Jihad trilogy, is that again, it's like they seem very literal. Also, it's like if you
Yes.
read someone's notes on something, and that person who wrote the notes clearly knows the themes and everything else behind it, but it feels like they took bullet points and took the most literal interpretation of it. The Butler and Jihad itself is an example of this, because there was, in Dune, the Butler and Jihad was that they basically eliminated thinking machines. You can't make a machine in the form of a human mind or whatever. And they made it literally, we smash all the machines. It's like, I'm not sure that's exactly what Herbert, not that there wasn't some of that probably went on, but it was extremely literal. And
the books read like an action movie. You could be like, all right, we're going to 3 books and we're going to smash machines. So how do we do a battle scene? Okay, battle scene here, battle scene there. We'll fight, destroy this planet, go over here. Then, hey, we win.
Right. And I love world building and background. And, next to Tolkien, you could argue that Herbert's world building is up there, compared to most other things. And so I did enjoy the books, from that respect, but it almost demystified things to the point of reducing it. I can't say that having read that enhanced the Dune universe for me. It like brought it down to a lesser level.
Yeah,
that's
not
just
as
my personal
philosophical, not as So a couple comments I'll make. Yeah, you see, like I mentioned this earlier. You say you attended signings with Herbert Anderson. He commented he had a trove of material from his father. Like I kind of believe that as well. I don't know for sure. We haven't seen the notes or anything. I mean, it could be something they would say in order to no, it's going to be just as good as my old man stuff. So he could have said that, but I don't want to be too cynical. I think that's probably true because, it was supposed that Frank Herbert wrote a lot of extra stuff and that he cut down. So yeah, I totally agree with your points, Cam. That's how it reads. So yeah, they took the bullet points and they just expanded a little bit, give some characters and stuff. That's how, the Butler and Jihad, it kind of reads. Now I want to talk real quick about, I want to mention that, the Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune, which are the 2 afterwards that kind of finish off the dots from Chapter House, and they basically solve the problem. I think that there's a lot of, his notes in there as well, but I don't know. What do you think?
Now, I didn't read those 2 because
you haven't? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm aware when you're talking about Dune 7 and 8. They're referred to sometimes, and they were supposed to finish off his original, Frank Herbert's original work. And after reading the other ones, I declined to read those because it's like, I think I'd rather leave it where it was, so don't worry, go ahead and spoil me if you want, but
I won't. Well, I mean, it goes full circle, and the final confrontation is with the machines.
Yeah,
But
which see,
but but those two books are they're a little bit meandering too, right? Because in them, if you remember the end of Chapter House, right?
yeah,
Duncan Idaho and Mirabella take off in a no,
okay,
sorry, he doesn't take Mirabella doesn't leave with him. He leaves off on a ship. So those two novels take place over like a 10-year period, and it's just Duncan Idaho and the people on the ship. They're kind of floating around in the nothingness of space in the middle of in absolute nowhere in space, trying to hide out from something.
hmm
And they're cloning. The Talaxu are cloning. They're making clones of all the greatest people in the Dune universe. And then there's it's kind of interesting with the Talaxu, but then there's a final confrontation with the Talaxu. Duncan Idaho is the hero versus
see,
him and the machines, and there's a kind of final. But what I wanted to talk about was that just on that, and this is kind of where you kind of wonder. So I think it's Quinn. I was watching one of his videos, and he's talking about, if you remember at the end of Chapter House Dune, there's an old man and an old woman
yeah,
that are seen, and they are they say some stuff. Now, I always assumed that it was I forget what Quinn said. He said there's something else, there's some other entities, but I always assumed the male was the version of Ominous, and the female was Erasmus, and that was the hint that these were the machine. He was hinting that these two are the main characters from the Jihad, and they're going to be, the machines are hinted at. But
well, that's what they made it into. But of course,
yes,
that those appearances were written before,
yes,
Erasmus and was ominous, whatever his name
well,
is.
they were written. Well, they wouldn't be written before if Frank Herbert had all this stuff laid out, right? Like,
Yeah,
it depends on how much he has laid out, right?
but there was also
So
they were also theorized to be face dancers, some kind of,
yes, and
that's a great mystery.
That's what Quinn talks about.
Yeah, I don't love that, to be honest with you. And going back to the whole thing, it's like, oh, and then we fight, we go back to the beginning and fight them, the machines. To me, that's like, man, this is just, it's like fanfic,
You're getting a little quiet there.
Oh, okay.
That's
What I
better.
was, okay, what I was saying is it just strikes me as very fanfic like. Um, it, it's like, oh, look, it just happens to come back to, it's like, what came first here, really? I'm not sure. It seems to me that they backfilled that. I don't know, obviously, and I'll never know, but it's just too neat, and nothing Frank Herbert was writing was like that, and so to turn it into what his son and Kevin Anderson did, it just doesn't seem,
Yeah.
you know,
I don't know what they were trying to say, what Herbert was going to. I mean, to me, it kind of makes sense that the final battle would be, the biggest threat to humanity has been the machines. So the final threat, it makes sense to me that the final threat could also be the machines, right? But another good threat is the face dancers, because by the end of the sixth novel, Chapter House Dune, the face dancers have basically taken over, and have even taken over the Talaxu. They've just infiltrated them. They've become, no longer slaves. They become self-aware, and they've become, so that that being a threat is a reasonable, that's a reasonable threat too. Now, I'm just thinking back. I'm remembering that the Butlerian Jihad, or the final threat, was supposed to be some sort of like hunter-seeker device that became sort of self-aware and was able to kill everyone. Like, that's one of the other theories about what was supposed to happen.
See, I don't buy any of this, and let me tell you why. Because the Butlerian Jihad and the machine thing, it was the background of the story. And the whole thing with the golden path and all that comes from God Emperor of Dune. It's like none of that was hinted at in any way in there, I don't think. And I don't know. I don't buy that's it, because Herbert was not getting less philosophical; he was getting more philosophical,
Yeah.
and this would be to crash it back down to, again, a very pedantic, oh, we're fighting robots, again, and it just doesn't mesh well for me. Even if that was exactly what was planned, it still doesn't mesh well for me as a reader.
Yeah. And I'm just going to mention so like I said, I'm a big fan of Dune, but I've lost, there's been a lot of other novels after, Winds of Dune and all kinds of,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's kind of interesting, the whole, you know, Brian and Kevin are writing novels that sort of just fit in these, now are writing novels that sort of fit into these small areas, right? So they've done these novels we mentioned. Then the next sort of set of novels are like Navigators of Dune, Mentats of Dune. They sort of focus on, those different guilds and how they became to be, which is, kind of interesting, I guess. Now we're going on to like Winds of Dune, which is talking, Jessica, looking at her life and what she did. So they're kind of getting to smaller and smaller areas. And I have to think that, the further they get out, the more novels they write, the less it is based on, if anything at all, on Herbert's stuff.
Yeah,
Frank Herbert stuff.
I think it's also unavoidable that it will demystify things, as I mentioned. It's like they're parsing out every single little bit of it, and again, this is coming from someone who loves world building.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Well, the good news is I don't need to read any of it.
Yeah.
So, but for people who want that level of dissection, it's there for you.
All right. So I think we talked about, we're getting near the end. I think we talked about, we killed that to death. Yeah. Should I go back? I kind of would be interested to hear your thoughts of, you read the Butler and Jihad novels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, would you like some of this stuff, like for example, the Bene Gesserit are supposedly based on the Sisters of Rossack, who are these psychic abilities. I mean, do you think that's that's a good starting point for the Bene Gesserit?
No.
Is that kind of like, does that sound realistic, or do you
No,
see Frank Herbert writing? Yeah, the Bene Gesserit are based on these psychic women who
No, and that's and they kind of did that in those. It was like, oh, here's the origin of the Mentats, here's the origin of the Bene Gesserit, here's the origin of the guild, and isn't it all nice and neat and tied up in a bow? And it's like, no, I mean, no, it didn't work for me.
Like some of it seems to make sense to me. Like, okay, well, the basis of Chom was these traders getting together and trading a lot of stuff. I mean, that kind of the basis of the guild are these guys. Oh, let's try to let's be navigating. Like those are kind of like pretty basic.
Yeah.
I mean, the Sisters of Rossack is a little bit beyond, but
I think. Well, you know what? I know we're getting late in here, but did you ever read the Encyclopedia of Dune, which is this unofficial thing that was written after Frank? Well, no, it was while Frank Herbert was alive, because he did comment on it, but it was before any of these prequel things came up, and it was basically fans, pre-internet days, that came up with all of this stuff, trying to backfill a lot of it. And Frank Herbert commented on it, and he I think the nature of his comment was like, oh, that's all very interesting, so he didn't endorse it, but he didn't say no to it either.
I'll have to check that out.
And of course, so much contradictory to these other novels that came afterwards, but it's very interesting. And I think the form in which that was presented would have been much better than these other novels, because it's like, okay, well, I want to know a little bit more about the Bene Gesserit and where they came from, and having something that didn't parse it down so much and make it so laid out in front of you and left a little bit of mystery would have been a lot better for the whole experience.
There is a bit of a sense of a cash cow, and let's milk that cow.
Sure.
With these, other novels, that's my own personal feeling. Like they're just pushing them out.
Yeah, and
like
I don't fault them. Go ahead, make make your money. I'm just talking personal preference, really.
Yeah. All right. I think we're going to wind it up, but I think I want to just talk a little bit about the various, games and that sort of thing that have come out. I'm going to talk a little bit about the video games and some of the board games that have come out. Just a little. I mean, I'm not that familiar with them, but people who are interested in Dune might be interested in these sort of things. So, originally there was a 1979 Dune game that come out that was called Dune, and it was by Avalon Hill. It was reissued in 2019 as sort of the start of this thing, that the original Dune board game. There was a Dune board game from Parker Brothers in 1984 that came out with that movie, and I remember playing that. I think we had it. I had it somehow for some reason, or at least somebody brought it over, but I've been unable to find it because it'd probably be a good collector's item. But those are old, the older things, well, except for the original Dune, of course, has been reissued. But a couple of, games that if people like board games, they might be interested. Dune Imperium, which is one we were talking about before. That's pretty popular and it's pretty strong. It's kind of a card. It's a board game, but it's sort of card driven. It's quite popular. It's up high on the board game lists.
Yeah,
and
there's an app version of that also.
Yeah, there's an app version that's pretty popular too, and it's already has an expansion out for it. There are a couple more Dune games that have come out that are coming out, but I don't really know these ones. Dune House Secrets, Dune War for Arrakis, and Arrakis Dawn of the Fremen. I don't know much about those board games. Those are a little bit newer. I haven't heard much about them, so I can't tell you about that. But I do know Dune Imperium is very popular with normies, everyday people. So you check those out. RPGs. Death Angel Shadow was talking about RPGs in the chat. Where was this comment? I'm just trying to look for it. I don't. It's way back at the beginning, but I have a little bit of information about. I can give a little bit of information about those things. They have. There was a bunch of role-playing games that originally in 2000 from Last Unicorn Games, which I think is one of the ones that Death Angel Shadow mentioned. It was called Dune Chronicles of the Imperium. It came out in 2000. It was they made about 3,000 copies of the core rule book, but then they were bought out by Last Unicorn Games was bought out by Wizards of the Coast. They wanted to convert it to the D20 role-playing system and release it, but it was later, it was discontinued, but it was later published. So you probably have a trouble getting that one. There was a Dune role-playing game called Dune: A Dream of Rain in 2004, and that's an unlicensed fan-made game based on the D20 system. And Dune: Adventures in the Imperium, which was released in 2021, coincides with the film, and that's I guess the modern role-playing game. But I haven't heard of that one much. Like, I don't hear it talked about in role-playing things, so I don't know how popular it is. For video games, there are a bunch of old video games. Dune 2. Dune 2 was probably the main one that was, and Dune 2 is also seen as one of the first RTS games. There was a couple of releases of those. I don't really want to go over them. They're not really, relevant. It's more of a, history of video game type of thing. But presently there are Dune Spice Wars, which has been released, and it's a sort of an RTS / 4X style game. And that was released about 2 years ago or so. And, it's out there. You can get it if you like that sort of thing. It's been, reasonably critically acclaimed. It's a pretty good game. The other one is Dune Awakening, which hasn't been released. And that is an open world action survival, massive multiplayer online game. So people don't know about that, but it's basically, I don't know, World of Warcraft, but in the Dune universe, or, what is the what's the Old Republic? That's the Star Wars version, but in the Dune universe. So that's kind of what's going on with the game aspect. And these were all, coordinated be released after the movie. They were trying to take advantage of the fact that the movies are doing well and going with that. So I hope that gives people a little bit. I'm sure Death Angel Shadow will probably give us more. He'll probably come and give us more information about. He knows more about RPGs than I do.
Yeah,
he probably can give us some more info on that.
I'll just mention quickly, there was also a collectible card game that didn't really go anywhere. I had some of it, and I
Really?
gave it to, a couple of years ago. I gave it to a game designer acquaintance of mine who wanted to get into it. I think I've got one deck left, but yeah, it
Really?
Yeah,
I've never heard of that. What was it called?
I don't know. I think it was just Dune the CCG or something like that. But it was hold on, let me look it up real quick. It was also by Last Unicorn Games.
Okay. Oh no, I see it here. Sorry. Card games. Dune collectible card game, 1997. It's just called Dune.
Yep.
Last Unicorn Games 2 and Wizards of the Coast. So I guess similar to Magic is the most well-known one.
Right.
So similar to that. Yeah, I missed that one. Yeah. So but those are all old. I think you can't get that anymore. I don't think they're doing any collectible card games, but the main ones, if you're looking board games, Dune Imperium, very good. Well played. Dune Spice Wars, fairly popular. And if you're the MMO type, the Dune Awakening, which is supposed to come out soon. So I'm not sure when, but yeah, I hope that closes off for anybody if they're interested in other Dune stuff. So we scratched the surface a little bit here, talked about our thoughts about it. Like I said, Quinn's Ideas is probably the place to go for deep dives into things. He's got tons of videos about Dune. I'm a little jealous, and he goes into some deep dives about various tiny aspects of the universe, and his stuff is pretty well produced too. So you go over there and you if you want to learn more deeper stuff. Is there anything that about does it for me? Is there anything you wanted to mention, Cam, about Dune that we missed?
I know we're out of time, but I'll just mention that there was two miniseries for Dune and then Children of Dune that was on Sci-Fi Channel back around the turn of the millennium. Yeah.
So one was called Dune and one was called Children of Dune.
Mm-hmm.
And they were about I think Dune was like a 2-part sort of 4 hours total, if I'm correct.
Something like that.
And then Children of Dune, wasn't that like an 8-episode miniseries or something like that?
Yeah, and it was really a combination of Dune Messiah and Children of Dune.
Yeah. Those two are, we didn't mention them at all. Those two are not bad. I remember Dune is kind of, you could tell it's it's early sci-fi.
The production value is not the best.
Yeah, there's a scene, that Paul and Jessica are after they're in the desert. They've escaped from the Harkonnen. They're running around. They're running around in their still suits, which are obviously just full coveralls that are painted, kind of green, different colors of green. Light green and a little bit of green here. I'm like, well, you should just at least paint them tan. But they're kind of like this green camouflage pattern, and they're running, and you can see the flapping around. You're like, that's a still suit. Oh, okay, well, sometimes you don't have enough money.
Yeah, but not bad in terms of story.
And following the storyline, and better than Dune 84. Yeah. All right, so let's talk. All right, so thanks for everyone for coming in and joining in on our Dune discussion, and hearing our thoughts. If you want to put anything in the YouTube after, saying you're full of crap, you're right, you're wrong, whatever you want, I'm happy to entertain those. I like discussing these sort of things. Programming notes tomorrow. We've decided to sort of change it up a little bit. So we're going to be talking about, Cam and I are going to be listing some of the lesser known science fiction books or series that we recommend that you read. So talking a little bit about them. The idea is going to be, hey, here's a series of books that you may not have heard of that are good, and talk a little bit about it, and hopefully that will get some people off on reading more science fiction, good science fiction. not the crappy stuff.
Right on.
All right. So that does it for today. Thanks everyone for coming out, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.